So Agent of Doubt made this video where he's kind of ragging on modern art, kind of. I've got a lot of sympathy with what he says actually. At one point he describes his the running of his market as his art, and I would agree with that. Those artificial separations between those activities we decide to label in an artistic mode and those we don't is just a limitation, isn't it really? So I'm very happy to accept that if Agent of Doubt thinks of his work as art, that's absolutely fine. But elsewhere he uses the word hobby. He distinguishes between professional artists who get paid for it, which he seems ambivalent about. If it's work he doesn't like Jackson Pollock, he seems to think that's a bad thing. But if it's work he does like and they get paid for it, then that's a good thing. But either way, he's making a demarcation between professional artists who get paid, for whom it is their living, and what he calls hobbyists, as I say. And I think it's kind of unfortunate. Sorry, I'm frying mushrooms here, by the way. That's why there's a hissing noise. I think it's kind of unfortunate to choose the word hobby, because hobby is. It's hard not to think of There's my toast. It's hard not to think of hobby as pejorative, isn't it? I prefer amateur, which again for many people will be also seen as equally pejorative. But I like the word amateur, partly because it comes from the word I don't know where it comes from, French anyway, which means lover. So I quite like the idea that it has that overtones of love, which hobby doesn't really, does it? Hobby is more like pastime, something to pass the time. Whereas amateur activity is doing something for the love of it. So I like it for that reason, but also because of its association, more historical now than actual, to a certain kind of spirit, particularly in sport. You know, sports people would be very careful not to lose their amateur status, because being an amateur sportsman or sports person is in some ways the bloody toast. Look at that. Fuck it. Because being an amateur sportsman has more credibility in some ways than being a professional sportsman. That's less so now, but it used to be the case. So there's something about that. So I like the word amateur for those reasons. But I'm not. I've got a lot of sympathy with what Agent of Doubt says in other ways, actually. And it is to do with this professionalism and amateurism, there's a distinction. But for me, it's not really to do with the money, although the money is kind of how you keep scoring these things. It's to do with what you're doing it for. I mean, I'm an amateur artist, and I make my living as an educator, and I make art not exactly on the side, you know, it's pretty central to what I do. I do things which I guess people would call art. It's pretty central to what I do in my life, but I recognise it's an amateur activity, I'm not being paid for it. But because that, yes, it gives me a certain amount of freedom, but it also frees me up from consequences. And that's the downside of amateurism, is that you don't have to respond to an audience, a market. If you're a professional, I know a lot of professional artists. I live in Cornwall. There's artists falling out the woodwork everywhere you go. And I know a lot of people who are professional artists in some way, and it's bloody hard work. There's not a lot of money in it for most folk. You have to do all kinds of things to support what you're doing. What you really can't be is purist. You don't have the luxury that I've got of saying, oh, I'm an amateur, I do it because I love doing it, I place it central in my life and this is what I do, and I make my living elsewhere. You know, if you're being a professional artist, you don't have that as a luxury. You have to always think, how am I going to make a living out of this? Which in one sense is a compromise, you know, and a kind of selling out, you might say. But at the same time, it's also an absolute recognition that art practice is always an interpersonal practice. You know, you're always doing it. You should be doing it at least for other people. You know, it's part of conversations, public conversations, isn't it, this art stuff we do? It isn't. I mean, it is in some cases, but in many ways, it shouldn't be, you know, something that you just do on your own and then hang in your room or put in a drawer. You know, it's real art. I'm breaking all my own rules about defining things here, but never mind. You know, real art in the sense that I like to think of it is public and takes place in public environments, and being professional, being reliant on your practice in order to make a living, is one way of ensuring and facing the consequences of public engagement. And there's lots of different publics, you know, that's the other thing about all this. You know, when Agent of Doubt was talking about it, he was talking about the art market. Well, actually, he was talking about two art markets. He just didn't make the distinction. He was talking about the art market that he serves, which is the buying public that comes into his market, which he sells the prints he makes, the paintings he does. And then there's the other art market, a different public, which perhaps buy Jackson Pollock's paintings for $250 million or something. I think is the figure we quoted, you know, just astronomical amounts. And these are just different publics, aren't they? I mean, one has got an enormous amount of power and wealth, which is unfortunate, so the prices get inflated astronomically. And those aren't the only two publics, are they? You know, you're always, if you're a professional artist, or if you're an artist which is working in a social context, if social engagement is absolutely part of your practice, which whether you're paid for it or not is for me a defining feature, then you kind of have to respect the fact that you are dealing with a public, and whilst it's not necessarily about serving their needs or giving them what they want so that they'll give you some money in return. That might be part of it, but there might be all kinds of other ways of becoming part of a public conversation, entering a small culture and developing work within that and in relation to it. You know, that's part of my fucking hair. One kind of artist I'm not, and that's a coiffeur artist. Look at that, fucking gorgeous. So yeah, so it's always about that too, isn't it, really? So just in conclusion, amateurism, I'm praising amateurism because there's something about love in there, but I'm also praising social contact, social engagement, whether that be the professionalism, through professionalism and the kind of financial incentives for maintaining contact with the public, or whether there be other kinds of reasons and ways of maintaining contact with the public. But it's always in those things for me. Anyway, I'm going to put these mushrooms on a piece of toast and then fry an egg. So thank you for your attention and welcome to my kitchen.